And there are many chapters in this story, and there are many versions of yourself, I feel. And I think you got to live with yourself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What does it mean if you don't have some sort of connection to something deeper? I felt so shit physically and mentally that I didn't possibly know how I would get through it. I felt like I'm going to die. And I went to the psychiatrist and he said I had a psychotic break, which was pretty scary as a 20-year-old to hear that. I was devastated and I didn't think I was going to recover.
William Balme,
Yes.
otherwise known as Willie B.
Thank you. Vinny Petrilli.
You got my name right this
Ty.
time. Yeah, love
Ty
it.
Jones.
Yeah.
That's it. Beautiful.
Strong
Anyway,
name,
yeah.
Ty Jones.
Thanks, mate.
How the bloody hell are you?
I'm well. I'm obviously I'm nervous to be here, but I'm also just like I've come back from. I was in WA, probably the remotest part of Australia, for 8 weeks, teaching in a community, Indigenous community, and it was really like it was a really simple life because like I'd teach, go to the gym, go to the pool, go to the shops. Here it's like back to Melbourne. I'm like, whoa. So I know it was a short time, but it was a really like consequential time, not in a bad way, like, but just like it was incredible. Like, it was one of the best experiences of my life. I'm so glad I did it because I wasn't going to do it. And so I'm feeling slightly unsettled being back for a couple of weeks. And I think that's normal. I think I was angry at myself this morning because I was supposed to go work. Yesterday I was supposed to work casual teaching, and I was just so tired. And I just was like, I've just got this ingrained, this is going a bit deep, but ingrained idea of like lazy, like I'm lazy, I'm being lazy. And that's the negative voice saying like, you're being lazy. And then I thought about it, I was like, no, rest is important as well. And after like a pretty intense 8 weeks where it was, it was very intense, simple life, but very intense in terms of the teaching and being part of a community, a small community, and getting to know it and always wanting to be on my best, in terms of impressing people at school and that sort of thing. I just think I've come back a little bit frazzled, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So how am I? Good.
Yeah. No, I love that. Interesting you say that. Because, especially when we get in our own head, there's such a difference between being lazy and preserving your energy.
Absolutely.
I think we can be quite hard on ourselves because we're our own worst critic, and we're
Absolutely.
like, if we're not doing something constantly, we feel bad about it. But really,
Definitely.
we're just trying to avoid burning out.
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time.
It could also be like a positive thing. It shows you got a lot of drive for something.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what was you wanting to do that you're saying you were being lazy that you weren't doing.
Yeah.
But it could mean that, something's on your shoulder saying you should do this, you should do that. That's usually a driving force to something.
Big time.
I guess it's good that you maybe just recognize that.
Yeah.
Too,
Yeah, I totally agree because I think that, and that's what I've come to today. I went to the gym, I did a couple of things before this, and I just feel really good right now. And I think it's because I allowed myself to go, okay, just have a rest. And then I sort of did a bit of writing. And when I think to be, I'm obviously a pretty creative person. So it was just nice to go, all right, stop all that shit that you're talking to yourself about being lazy, about being, about wasting time and all that is actually just this message from myself going, well, maybe actually you just needed a bit of space to go, okay, I want to do some writing, or I want to think about things, or I want to process a couple of things that have happened that were, relatively heavy over the past few months. So, and that drive, of course, I think we're all so, there's like, particularly living in a big city, we're all driven to be like, to find our way. And like, if we're not finding our way or not going forward in a way that we think is positive, then we get, I know a lot of people get down on ourselves and go like, well, that's it. I've fucked everything,
Yeah, 100%.
Which is not true at all.
Yeah.
Things just keep going.
Yeah, and that is the anxiety that we all experience as well. But that's obviously one of the topics we're going to be covering today. But we're both super excited to have you on today because
thank you.
I've
come in hot.
I love it.
Sorry.
You're a deep man. We love getting deep. So consider you one of my best mates now. So we've shared a lot together. So it's a pleasure to have you on. We could talk for days. You've got a lot to offer. And you've got an amazing, extraordinary story as well. So for those who haven't heard it, we're excited to share that for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
There's going to be a bit of a theme of this throughout the podcast today, but what would one limiting belief be that you've got that still holds you back today?
Oh, I love that question. That is a great question. I think the limiting belief for me is I'm not strong. I wasn't that strong in terms of physically, but also mentally. And I think I'm getting through that, but there's still points where I'm like, I doubt my strength, which actually like I've disproven with like getting a bit bigger. And I used to be like really skinny and lean just a lot. You know, people would sort of, you know, at school would be like, you're, you know, undersized, that sort of thing. And I think it comes back to my relationship with Dad. But I think I'm sort of starting to prove that myself wrong in terms of mentally, like I know I'm strong. It's just obviously I've got things to consider every day that a lot of people do as well. But then physically as well, they just sort of tie into each other. So I think it's that whole idea of this limiting belief of how strong I am. And I'm trying to challenge that every single day. So that's a bit of a deeper answer. But
yeah, great answer.
Yeah.
Love a deep answer.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Good one. Good,
Thanks.
Strong start, mate.
Thanks, mate. I've come in buzzing. I love this stuff, and you know that. Like, it's so good. Yeah.
Anyway, 100%.
Vinny, that was a great question, actually. I'm very impressed with that
Glad
question.
you liked it. You've been really open with the fact that you've struggled with an anxiety disorder for many years, and you've created a foundation based around this, which we'll get to later. But we want to talk about anxiety. We want to talk about, you know, the elephant in the room.
Sounds good.
People are getting better at discussing anxiety and mental health. For those who don't know your story, can you give us a bit of a rundown on, you know, your experience with anxiety and how it all played out for you?
I won't bore you with the details, but as a kid, I always had, I was a very anxious kid. And I reckon there were times where I showed that, you know, particularly in private as I did, but even in front of schoolmates, you know, when things went wrong, cry a lot, even like through primary school, but also high school. So it was definitely already in me, and it stopped me from doing a lot of different things. I felt like I was stuffed. And I think, you know, as that immediate reaction, that's what anxiety can do when it's really out of hand, is make you feel like and for me, a lot of it comes back to like health anxiety, panic disorder, that whole idea that, you know, I'm going to die, you know, or I feel so bad that I don't want to go on. And that's not so much suicidal. It's just more like feeling so shit physically and mentally that I didn't possibly know how I would get through it. Yeah, it's still fairly raw, that sort of stuff, because it's really difficult to go through. And a lot of people go through things like this. You know, I'm in a pretty good place now, but it doesn't mean that I haven't had times where I've sort of fallen back on that track. And I think that's always been the scariest thing for me, is, you know, going back to that place. And I don't think I will, but you know what I mean? Like, you're always, and I think that's about like looking after yourself and that sort of thing. So still feel anxiety most days of my life.
Do you feel like you say, you know, going back to that place, do you feel like you're in control of yourself and you can sort of, you know what to do in order to prevent yourself from going back to that place? Yeah,
definitely. I think I've come so far and worked really, really hard. But there are times, of course, when I'm like, it's almost like that response of like, even when I'm not anxious, I'm thinking about anxiety. And I suppose that also comes with a bit of trauma of those experiences. But I think I've done enough work to think that even when I'm not feeling great, I've done the work to avoid going back to rock bottom. And that's great. Like, I'm really proud of that.
That's
so
awesome,
yeah.
You were diagnosed with generalised anxiety disorder. At what point did that happen, and can you explain a bit about that?
Everything that I did sort of made me feel like I was panicked and it was hard to explain. I didn't feel like I had any idea how to explain this to parents or to friends. So I think I went to my GP, and he was a really good GP, not my GP anymore, but he was pretty much like, you got panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. You should go see a psychiatrist. And he goes, don't worry, even if your heart's beating 160, 200 kilometers an hour, you're not going to, 200 beats a minute, you're not going to die. Because I'd feel like at times I'm like, oh, am I having a heart attack? Am I having a stroke? Am I all these things? And you read up, and that's probably the worst thing you can do is read up on them. That's right. Google, Dr. Google. And that was, from there. And I went to the psychiatrist, and he said I had a psychotic break. And he's like, you're extremely lucky that you're in a space now that you are pretty good. Obviously with this disorder, but like it could have been, a lot worse, which was pretty scary as a 20-year-old to hear that, I think. But that was so important for me to hear that and go, sweet. It puts it into perspective that I'm lucky. It doesn't mean it makes it easier, but it could have been worse.
How did anxiety manifest for you personally?
It's really, another good question. Big things for me, I suppose, was avoidance. Like I would avoid things that I knew would make me nervous. So that was like performing. I've always enjoyed performing, singing, that sort of thing. And I just totally avoided that for a while. Even footy, because my heart rate would be up there and I just feel really uncomfortable and still sort of stuck in that, am I dying here? And that takes a lot of obviously unpacking. But also like currently, so what I'll feel is in the morning, sometimes I just feel a bit of malaise, a bit of like, just uncomfortable through certain parts of my body, just tight. And obviously I have to like tell myself this is what it is, as well as like the negative self talk, which sometimes comes around if I'm not looking after myself.
Imposter syndrome,
Yeah, and I think the big thing that if people don't understand anxiety that well, it's very physical. Symptoms can be really physical, and mine were particularly physical in nature in terms of like tight, but also just like heart feeling like it's about to not explode, but get to a point where it sort of sets everything off. So it's like almost one thing happens and all of a sudden you're like, oh no. And then like there were times when you go cold through legs and like some of the symptoms are so strange and you look them up and people will be like, yep, I've experienced this. So that was actually kind of relieving as well, because you're like, okay, it can make you think that these things that are happening in your body, which are so bizarre. I was just going, got to keep marching forward, got to keep going to work, got to keep, going out with my friends and putting on a brave face. And really like that was just repressing how I was feeling.
Sweeping it under the rug, yeah.
Exactly.
And I think what that, like you're saying, avoidance, like that's the first step, right?
Big time.
Like that's probably the one thing that everybody can relate to.
Yeah.
At the start, because that's the first thing. It's like, oh, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because it's like your body saying, no, if you do that, something bad might happen to you.
Exactly. And it's evolutionary. Obviously, anxiety comes back from, when we were hunting and, we were running away from bears or whatever, whatever was happening when we're in like prehistoric times. Fight or flight, exactly. Yeah. Obviously, we haven't quite caught up to the idea that like just because you're going into a meeting doesn't mean that the boss is going to turn around and stab you. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes it can make you feel that way. Obviously, I'm not thinking they're going to stab me, but more like if I like, what happens if I pass out in this meeting? Yeah. And it's not going to happen, but you still, that's what it can convince you that you are on track to do something like that.
Yeah, I remember being 6 years old. I started school when I was 6, and in year 1, our school, I went to a pretty good school. I was lucky. We did orals year 1. I was a pretty quiet kid. I didn't have I was an only child, so and both my parents are quite quiet and reserved people. So I wasn't brought up in a home where I had like 3 siblings and it was like fighting for attention and everybody shouting over each other. So for me, it was like I always had the attention on me from my parents,
right?
And I never really had someone else to speak to in my young years. So I didn't really grow up
Yeah.
with this amazing ability to converse at a young age. So when I stood up in class in front of like a group of like 30 kids, like I fumbled the way through. I hated it. And then that affected me for like the rest of my schooling career. I hated oral, and I was bullied at school too.
Yeah.
So then I grew up going like not wanting to go and make the first move to make friends, or you go into a party, I'd be like, nobody wants to talk to me.
Yeah.
So you just would shut up, and then you would avoid not going because you don't want to have the anxiety of being in that position, being like, oh my God, what the fuck do I say now? Like, what do I say? Yeah, I'm in this position. Then you end up fumbling and saying all the wrong things, and it just steamrolls from there.
Yeah.
So it's like
Big time.
everybody has
Absolutely.
some shape or form. Like everybody experiences anxiety, but maybe like they don't know how to articulate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of the anxiety we feel when we're an adult, it did manifest when we were younger.
Big time.
Can you tell us a bit about that anxiety that sort of started from a young age?
I was listening to Ty, and I like resonate so much with that stuff. Like, it's great to hear it from someone else because, as kids, you do embody a lot of the stuff that's going on, and it comes with you, of course. It's hard to shake. It's like being bullied at school. Some people might not think it's a big deal, but for the person who gets bullied, and there's moderate, minor bullying, but then there's like severe bullying that can totally, I don't want to say ruin, that's the wrong word, can really affect their life for the rest of their life, really. Like, they'll work through that till they get older.
It takes a lot of work to get through that.
That's right.
And if you don't get through it, it sticks with you. So yeah, it is big. Like,
and I think just like, going back to your point about like, I also went to a really good school, and an affluent school. I lived in an affluent area, had a great childhood, I had great parents. So what I'm saying is, like, coming from a place of, I get it, like privilege, but it just shows like this can happen to anyone as well. But what I also am trying to find with how I speak is going, I've had safety nets up as well as a kid, safety nets of like, access to good healthcare, and obviously later in life going to psychologists, psychiatrists, being able to afford them, or at least having the support from my family. Some people don't have any of those safety nets, which is why, mental health is such an important thing to have accessibility. But going back to childhood for me, I think, Dad, not to blame at all, but his stature definitely filled me with, and we spoke about it a lot in the documentary, just filled me with an uncertainty that I could live up to that. And I think it just manifested in me in that whole idea of like not thinking I'm good enough. That is the measure of a man, is to be good at sport or to be physically, capable. And I really wasn't. I was quite a small kid. And I think from that, it led on to this doubt that I had about myself in the classroom or in friendships or in relationships. So all that sort of doubt that came from that, unfortunately, sort of carried through sort of in my nature. I couldn't shake it like other people can clearly shake things like that and go, well, that's all right. I'm not good at that, so I'll try that. Because I think it even carried into the things I was really good at. Like, I was pretty good at in the theatre. I was a pretty good student, but still I would have those doubts of like, but I'm not good enough. And I know that's certainly not unique by any stretch. Every kid has feelings like that.
But it's a unique situation that you were in. I mean, the pressure at that age, you probably weren't taught to deal with that. And who was to know too? So you're sort of like shaping the way for other kids that's maybe going in the same direction. You're just confident enough now to actually talk about it.
Big time.
Put your mask down, that mask.
True,
thing, I applaud you for that.
Thank you. But sorry, very quickly relating it, because Dad, and we'll speak about this later, but Dad was like, I never knew. I never knew it had such an impact on you. And I just didn't have the words to go, Dad, this is making me, because I was embarrassed. I'm a man, I'm growing up. I'm like, Dad, I'm not going to tell you all this sensitive stuff. Like, I'm not going to be like, because I knew I would cry. I knew I'd be like, and I did once when I was working on a fitness plan. Dad came upstairs and was like, are you okay? You're acting a bit strange. And then I'm like, I've got this gym plan, I got to do all these push-ups and run, and I want to, And then he's like, and he asked, he's like, it's all right. Like, you don't have to do this stuff. And I was like, well, I have to because, and it was that moment of me, like, I just bawled. And I was like 14 because I just like, I felt like all I wanted to be was like Dad, And yeah.
And just for those that don't know, your dad is Neil Balme. He's quite prominent in the Australian Football League world. He was a player himself for many years. So obviously as a kid, you looked up to him as this masculine figure. You touched on it before, but how did he respond to when you broke down and realised you were going through a bit of a tough time?
Yeah, I think he was always super supportive. But he, the same as me, didn't have the words or the tools or the strategies to cope with a son who's going through this, let alone himself. And he used to mention things about he had one period of his life when he was really anxious, but he'd always be like, oh, there's something, and I read all these books and I did all this. But it was never like, because of course back in the 60s, 70s when he grew up, there wasn't the language to sort of approach talking about things that were really difficult to consider, and also a weakness, considered a weakness for men to be like, hysterical and all that sort of stuff, even sensitive and emotional. So while he was really supportive, I think it was just still really difficult for him to be like, how we're going to help you, go to a psychologist, because he'd never been to a psychologist. My mum had never been to a psychologist. So yeah, while extremely supportive, and when he found out, he was like, oh, I never would have thought that my son would go through this. And I never would have thought that you would shy away from things. He also probably didn't have the strategies and tools to recognize that this was a genuine problem for me.
And he too was paving the way for other fathers to go in, because he was
big time
in his heyday. Like,
yeah,
it was very different. Like, they were the first, in his, because it was the 90s, right? When your dad, no, wait, that's the 80s.
Played in the 70s. He's an old man.
Oh, okay. Right.
But you're right. Like, he was coaching and working in football 80s, 90s, when it was sort of becoming more full-time. And there was probably more consideration about, this is important, but this is also really important. I think our mindset back in the 70s was just kill them,
Yeah, it was
kill the opposition.
Physical.
Yeah, really physical and very violent. And then obviously it was adjusting throughout the 80s and 90s to still a violent game, but a game where you can outsmart your opponents. And also concussions and that sort of thing sort of reared their ugly head. And there was more talk about, we actually got to look after this. Yeah.
Mental health is becoming more, like, a lot more of a priority for society and the AFL as well.
Yeah.
You had a chance to speak to Neil, your dad, when you guys were doing a podcast a few years ago, and you just had an open father-son chat about your struggle with anxiety and depression, and he, some of the things in that conversation that you guys had, he didn't quite realise that's what you were going through. Can you sort of tell us a bit about that and what doors that opened for you, both as father and son?
It was funny. That whole podcast was really about me being able to talk to Dad on the level that I really wanted to. So I started it. I did all the heavy lifting. I was like, Dad, come along. And we obviously had episodes with guests and all that, but that was the episode I really wanted to happen because I needed to have that chat with Dad because it was well overdue. And there were things that I don't know, I just didn't think I could tell him in a setting without wanting to escape. Like, Dad, I've got, and just being like, oh, it's all right, we'll do it another time. So this actually just forced the issue. And it was the most uncomfortable I've ever seen him. He's really good, don't get me wrong. But I walked away from that actually thinking, did we even cover any of the, I could tell he wanted to escape. In hindsight, I did word him up on it, but probably didn't tell him enough about this is what we're talking about. And obviously he's dealt with a lot of players who've had mental health issues and things like that, but never his son. And I know, other siblings in my family. And I think that forced the issue for both of us to go, this is really, really, really hard to talk about. And I wanted to be like, this could be a framework for other fathers and sons, or fathers and daughters, or mothers and daughters, mothers and sons, whatever, to have that conversation. And whether that actually had that effect, I don't know, but it allowed me to have a conversation with Dad that I've been sitting on for years.
This is one of our favourite questions, which we did ask a few people in the doco.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what is it to be a good man? What does that mean to you?
I struggled with that question when you asked me in the documentary. I think we had like 6 or 7 takes because I was like, I don't even know. And it was awesome to hear other people answer that question. And I think we talk about it a lot in society and in media and that sort of thing, because everyone's perspective on this is different. But I think a good man acknowledges their faults, doesn't make excuses for those faults, but it could be a reason, if you know what I mean. Like, say, well, you got me angry, so this, I think that's not actually, that was the old school idea of what a man is. I think definitely there's a part of it of embracing vulnerability and embracing that we're human as well, and we have faults and we have flaws, but also really taking into account the person that you're with. And I think as men, we still see ourselves as protectors in a lot of ways, and not so much trying to protect people from the world, but also being a support. I think good men can provide a really, really important support base for other people, their friends or their family or their sons and daughters. So I think it's acknowledging obviously our faults, but also being like, how can I make it better? And that doesn't mean better in terms of like everything has to keep moving forward. It might actually be taking a step back at times and going, I don't think I handled that very well. How do I make up for that? And it could be having a conversation with a loved one saying like, I'm sorry as well. So I think this is a complex answer, but there are many things a good man is, and they're not going to be that all the time, but it's also just, I think comes back to being vulnerable, honest, supportive, and emotionally available.
At the end of the day, we're all human, so we're gonna make mistakes. But
absolutely,
I think it's how you make it right.
Yeah.
In my opinion, part of being a good man is being open and vulnerable and honest, which you are really good at doing all of those things. Something you shared recently on your social media was a post about the things that anxiety told you you couldn't do. So those limiting beliefs. What were some of those things?
That post was all about things that, and even on that day, I was feeling like a bit like I can't do this, or I shouldn't do that, or it's going to make me feel this. And so it's talking about what anxiety has led me to avoid. And it went from sort of talking about really simple things like eating out alone or going to the movies alone or whatever, like stupid stuff.
That takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, it does. And I've spoken to people about this, and they're like, I could never do that alone. I'd be like, I went to the movies last night. I saw a 3.5-hour film by myself, Killers of the Flower Moon. Great film. Scorsese could afford to cut out an hour and a half though. But it was so brilliant. It was about like Indigenous people in the USA, and I was like, I reckon Scorsese, if you cut off an hour, more people would see this. But it was still a brilliant film. Anyway, it sort of got more into then talking about how anxiety told me, I can't drive on busy roads in peak hour, things that actually really annoy me, and I'm getting better at that. And I think moving away has helped me because I do the drive quite often, but there's still things that just like I feel unsafe sometimes when I'm in certain situations, and I hate that it controls me in that way. And then even getting to like loving the person in the mirror. Anxiety told me, and I know a lot of people feel this, where you look in the mirror some days and you go, I'm disappointed, or I'm frustrated, or I'm annoyed at the person that I'm looking at. And that sometimes is humorous. I wish I had more hair. Other times it's existential. It's like, I wish that I was better at this. I wish I could be stronger. I wish I could be that. So it's sort of talking about things that I think are universal. Not just for people with anxiety or depression or whatever, but just, being human sometimes is about going, I I'm disappointed, but you know what? Even just by me posting that, I'm like, that's me taking it on and saying to my feelings that I have sometimes, or negative thoughts, you know what? Like, yes, sometimes you can get on top of me, but I'll keep trying, and I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll keep trying again. And, you know, that's like, it's, yeah, that's still, you know, for me, something that affects me, obviously, as you can tell. That whole idea of like each morning is a new day, the sun will rise. Yeah, and I've had those periods where I'm sure people have where you can't get to sleep, and you actually like, I've had times where I'm like, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die tonight because I'm feeling so shit and that. And then the morning will come, and even if I didn't sleep that night, at least the morning came and it's a new day, and very symbolic. But it's also challenging what my mind tells me I can't do.
Our mind put ourselves in our own prison, really. Like we really put ourselves in there and lock the key and throw it out.
Absolutely.
And it's all pretty much from how we've been conditioned, right?
Yeah, big time.
Right? Like acceptance at the end of the day, right? We all want to be accepted. I think we spoke about this with Yana too, acceptance. And, you know, like you talking about losing your hair and things like, why is that a problem?
Yeah.
You know?
I know. Right, exactly. And yeah,
I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah. Looks good.
It's going back.
Ty, you're a gorgeous man. You are
Thanks,
you are
mate,
you are
but
gorgeous. And
like-
and so are you, Vinny.
I feel like I've been very attached to my hair. I don't want to lose my hair, but it's
Big
going.
time. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you got to question yourself, like, why?
Yeah.
Like, why is that so important?
Yeah. That's right.
And it's only something that I guess us as human beings being conditioned through
Big time.
society, I guess it's our responsibility on ourselves to rewrite that story for ourselves. But only you can do it. Nobody's going to do it for you.
There are many chapters in this story, and there are many versions of yourself, I feel. And I think the person I was 10 years ago, not the person I am today. The person I was 2 years ago has elements of myself, of course. That was me, but it's not me right now. And I think that's coming back to that acceptance of like the different chapters of your life. And I think we're all scared of getting older, I think, or most people are. But as I've got a bit older, I'm like, it's pretty cool that I'm getting older. Rather than when I was 20 thinking, I'm going to die. I'm dying. You know, it's like actually quite nerve-wracking. And, you know, there's still things that I'm like, oh, man, imagine getting old and being like that. But I'm also like, well, imagine getting old and having all these stories to tell and going like, I got through that. And I achieved this. And, you know, yeah.
Well, getting old at all, like that's a privilege in itself.
Oh, absolutely.
And like you say in the doco, we're all a work in progress.
I don't know how that even came to me, but I'm sure it was relating to the whole idea of, I think it helped me just saying we're a work in progress. It's like, you know, it goes back to what I was just saying, being like 20 and thinking we're a finished product. Well, no, that's ridiculous. Like being, you know, 33 and thinking I'm a finished product. Of course, I'm not a finished product. And that doesn't mean things are going to get better necessarily, but I think we become wiser. Well, hopefully, if we're aware of who we are and how we present in the world and the people we come across and bump into, and it doesn't just stop. You know, it doesn't stop with your current group of friends. You might meet people you're like, that's amazing. I've never met a person with your perspective, Ty, or your perspective, Vinny. And I think that's the thing. It's
we're all unique, yeah.
Yeah, and we can't give up on humanity in that way, if you know what I mean. Like, it's awesome to meet new people, have new experiences, just as it is to have traditions and customs that we're like excited about. You know, catching up with our families for Boxing Day, for instance. So being a work in progress is just about the fact that we're always, every day is a new challenge, and the mistakes I made don't define me, just as the successes that I have had don't define me. You know, it's a jigsaw puzzle of many different elements or many different pieces, and sometimes we lose them. And sometimes we lose them for good. And then other times we find new pieces. I don't know. There's a metaphor in there that would be tighter than what I just said.
Always learning.
Big time.
One thing we did want to put out there when we were creating the doco was the fact that there wasn't a solution. Like it was just about learning to manage it,
big
manage the depression, manage the anxiety, and we are all a work in progress. But in terms of some of the positive ways that you did manage your anxiety, what were some of those things?
I think number one, which we detailed a lot, was definitely writing, sort of just getting thoughts down about how I was doing. And it allowed it to be private. I'd go to work and then I'd be on the train ride home. I'm like, it actually gave me like a sense of purpose where I'm like, I'm going to go write about this. So even on the train, I'd be feeling like garbage. And I get home and I just sort of write about day 1, day 2, day 3. And that was really helpful. Definitely, opening up to friends about how I was feeling was just vital. So I think actually just putting it out there led to that acceptance of like, okay, people know about this now. It's not, I still feel a lot of shame, but not to the point where I'm like, I'm going to smother this completely and keep, smiling about how I'm feeling, instead being like, I actually don't feel that well at the minute and I'm working really hard to get better. And writing, I think releasing it to people online, some would say is far too intimate, but for me it was really, really helpful. People reading it and going, holy shit, that's intense. Yeah. But then relating it to their own experiences. There are obviously a lot of other things that I did with management. Seeing a psychologist was really, really important. Even antidepressants for a while. I'm not on them anymore, which is great. But also, that they do come with a certain stigma, and some people take them every day and it helps them. There's a whole lot of things, but I think it is about not also just accepting you're not fixing this. And anyone who says you can fix it, I just don't agree you can completely fix it. I think people can manage it extremely well to the point where maybe they don't feel anything more than regular anxiety that comes up, which is awesome. But I still don't know if I don't think fixing is the right word, if anything. So I think the language you use is really, really important around this stuff as well. I think we've all had experiences where people are like, don't cry or don't feel this way or don't that. It's like, well, what's wrong with crying? What's wrong with feeling emotion? What's wrong with feeling emotions that we call negative, And I think men, we have a lot of, we were conditioned, a lot of us to feel, anger and, happiness or just being neutral rather than like the sea of sometimes beautiful emotions that we feel, like being able to express that movie made me really sad or that movie made me really happy. And I can actually just show that rather than being like, being really stoic, which I think a lot of older folk have been brought up to feel. And I think still quite a lot of people in our generation feel they have to be really stoic, really strong.
Just bottle it all up. Keep it internal,
yeah. She'll be right kind of attitude.
Yeah, it's not that effective in the long run.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. A lot of your writing that you did while you were trying to process that anxiety, it was in the form of letters to your anxiety.
Yeah.
How did it feel writing those?
Really painful. It was. I'd love to say that every time I was writing, it was like, yes, but it actually wasn't. It was really painful because that was what I was going through. That was how I was feeling at the time, and it wasn't nice. It was really confronting, but it was good to get it out of me because I was thinking that. Writing, it's a whole different story. You read back, you're like, even now you hear some of that stuff, I'm like, okay, that was a point in my life when I was like I was devastated and I didn't think I was going to recover. So that's even like it, challenging to think about how I was feeling at the time, but that was just how I was feeling.
And
I'm not laughing because I'm finding it funny. I'm just feeling uncomfortable.
We're here for it.
That's normal. We all have different ways of reacting. I also do the same thing, really.
Yeah.
But appreciate you opening up and
thank you.
Always so open.
Yeah.
the letters to your anxiety did lead us to creating a special project. So we obviously met in London quite a few years ago, and at that time I didn't even realise that you were struggling with mental health and depression and anxiety, because you're always armed with a smile and a good attitude and always up for a good time. But that just goes to show you just don't know what's going on beneath the surface.
Big time, yeah.
So it wasn't until we were both back in Melbourne that I realised what was going on underneath it all, and that's when we got talking. And over 5 years we shot bits and pieces of your journey, dealing with a lot of heavy stuff. To create the doco, and Ty jumped on the journey as well during that time. And we released it last year, and it is really a true raw exploration of what you were going through, and it documented over 5 years. I think we thought during that time we were going to shoot it in a year or something.
That's right.
The fact that we did it over such a long period of time, it really showed your growth as a human, and sort of how you had managed it over time, and how you are still in the process of managing it. But we had a few screenings last year when we released the documentary, 35-minute doco about your story, and it's been in a couple of film festivals now, which we're pretty proud of. But how was it for you? Because you're so open and vulnerable in that piece. How was it for you to see people's response to it? What sort of responses did you have?
Very briefly, it's still remarkable work from you. And I've seen some of your stuff with Reach, and I just love what you're doing. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on your podcast, but I just wanted to say, because it's still, even when I watch it now, and I haven't, it's not like every night I'm like, I better recapture what I was, but I just feel like it's still a project that I'll look back on many, many years down the track and go, I'm just so proud of what you did and what we did together, and with Ty as well. So that was, just a little, I've said this many times to you, but that was actually, I think, going back to the first screening, I was so nervous going into it. I was really, I think we were both very nervous. We stood up the back.
You really put yourself out there, like it's deep, and to have it on a big screen in front of a lot of random people that you didn't even know as well. That's,
and then to get up there and talk too.
I know I didn't know what I was saying afterwards.
The anxiety is always going to be in the back of your mind as well during that time, being like, are people resonating with it? And of course they were, but you go through the motions in your head.
Again, going back to watching it with you at the back, I was literally thinking, I wonder if people in the audience like, oh, get over yourself, mate. Oh, you boohoo, your dad's this famous guy and you've had this. I'm like, so there was just that nagging thought of like, but then as I was watching it, I just grew more comfortable with like, no, I know this is a really amazing project. And it's my truth. And the responses, fortunately, were not fortunately, really. It wasn't about luck. It was about like people really responded and related and empathized. And even if they'd never felt anything like this, they knew someone. They knew someone like their uncle had, and had has depression or had depression, or their auntie or their grandma or their sister or whatever. So I think everyone in the room, it was like, and I had people like a guy, a very good friend of mine, said to me, he's not an emotionally. He's a very happy-go-lucky guy. And he goes, that was a unique, I've never seen anything like that, because it's about this really raw retelling of the story and it was kind of in chapters as you did. Like the format was so well done. But then I had a father who, his son I kind of knew through uni, and he's a really good guy, but I don't see him much. And he brought his dad along, and his dad at the end of the documentary jumped up afterward and hugged me, and he goes, "Thank you." And that's pretty much all he said. And I spoke to this guy afterwards, and he goes, "Dad and I have had so much trouble talking about." He's got quite complex mental health issues, and he goes, "Dad and I, we've just been trying to find a way we can talk about this." And seeing you and your dad talk about it on screen was pivotal And I don't know what's happened from there, but that response to me was probably the most, it was so moving. And it was just a really moving night. Yeah, so the responses were incredible. And they were so varied, weren't they? Like, I know you had some conversations with like mothers and that sort of thing. And other people just come up and go, good job, who were like, yeah, that was cool too. So it's just really gratifying. And it was really cool to share, and hard to share in other people's experiences of what they felt when they were watching, as we all do when we watch movies. How do we relate to it? Documentaries, though, those really honest and raw documentaries. That's what I love about film. And I know you guys obviously do as well, but storytelling and film, just those responses and how people, take a stimulus and how that makes them feel, I think is incredible.
Creates perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Big time. Yeah.
Yeah, we all live in our own bubble and we have our own experiences.
That's right.
And you get to, you sort of, your world is what you know. So the moment you're subject to somebody else's world and it shows you, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then you can relate to it. I don't know. We're all, I don't know what the word is, but I don't know what the word is.
You have such a quiet thoughtfulness about you, and I noticed it on that podcast I watched you. So all your points, and that also relates to me making this film and being like, and having these bouts of really anxiety and thinking, oh, it's all me, it's all on me, and then just going, no, actually, I'm living in my own bubble, and I think that relates to the responses as well. You're like, oh yeah, right. Other people have experienced this, and in different ways, but in very unique ways. But it doesn't mean that they don't understand.
Yeah.
We're all longing for connection. That's it.
Big
I
time.
think that's it. We're all longing for connection. And then when you have your own reality and you see somebody else's and you relate to it, then you feel connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's it.
Spot on.
Yeah. And you are creating a lot of connections now through the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
You started the Ebbs and Flows, which is your organisation.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, still very much a work in progress.
Yeah.
Started a
So you
podcast similar to you guys. I've had 10 episodes and I'm just getting back to, I've got my first episode next week with Ainsley Wills, who's an incredible singer, songwriter. Very, very fortunate to have someone of her talent on my show. I admire her. So there's just little doors that are opening. I still need to work smarter in terms of I'm putting a lot of pressure on like how many listens and how many that. It's like, well, no, I just enjoy doing this anyway. Alongside that, at the minute I'm sort of developing a website, and with the documentary, I've had a lot of thoughts about what could I do with this or what could we do with this. And there's one thought, it's like, is it on its own, and you keep working on other stuff. But also, is this a valuable tool that could also lead into something like what Reach are doing? That's a fairly competitive space. So I think I'm probably second guessing myself a bit, but talking with you guys and doing things like this really helps me as well. Just go like, okay, no, any connection and any like form of, vulnerability about things that are hard to talk about is really important. Just about finding ways you can do that. It's helpful for others that they'll go away from and go, cool, okay, well, how am I going to have that really difficult conversation with my dad? Or how am I going to have that, how am I going to approach a mate who's really struggling right now? Yeah, so there's the podcast part and there's thinking about how I can take this round to other people. I've got a lot of ideas as well. I always have lots of ideas, but it's about going, okay, just focus on a couple of things. But yeah, at the end of the day, what it's about is it's about openness, transparency, but also trying to reduce stigma, shame around mental health conditions, and yeah, hopefully promoting accessibility as well. That's the core of it. And obviously there's a lot, in terms of where it goes from here. But yeah, it's pretty exciting. Yeah.
And looking back now, knowing what you know now, what would you say to your younger self?
Honestly, after like something like where I've just been in Balgo, I think opening myself up to new experiences and to culture and language and all these things that people hold really dear to their own their self and their connections. Because I think I was very one-track minded and naive, and scared of making mistakes and all that. And really, essentially, so much of life, I suppose, is those new experiences and opening your mind up further and going like, that surprised me and that made me feel this way and all that. And I think just that would probably be the thing I'd say. Open yourself up, whether it's new experiences or traveling somewhere really different, or learning about other cultures and that sort of thing is just really cool and really exciting. And also it probably pulls you away from feeling like everything's got to be perfect. I've got to, graduate from uni, go to get a really good job, work my whole life and earn all this money. It's like, well, what does it mean if you don't have some sort of connection to something deeper? Or whether it is happiness or spirituality or that sort of thing. Like, you got to live with yourself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you're thinking you're only doing it for money or you're only doing it for a certain thing, where's the depth? Where's the nuance in your life, and where's your understanding about humanity and how the world works and all that?
Where's your passion? Yeah.
Where's your passion? Yeah. So I think my younger self was just in such a rush. It's like, you just want to grab him and go like, mate, it's gonna happen, and you're gonna make all these errors, and you're gonna learn from them. But don't be scared to actually dip your toe in.
I love that. And I love like just the concept of slowing down, because you get to, I don't know about you guys, I'm sure you're the same, but like as an adult, life gets faster.
Oh
and
yeah.
It's like, sometimes it's nice to just stop and smell the roses.
Absolutely.
As cliche as that sounds, but like it's just a metaphor for just stopping down and appreciating the little things.
Big
and
time.
I think we've got to always remind ourselves to do that.
Absolutely.
It's a skill. It's like
It
we
is.
have to learn, right? Like it's a habit. We're all creatures of habit.
Big time.
And it's so used to like, we'll finish this podcast off, and then we'll rush to pack up, and then we'll rush to,
That's right.
to get the gear in the car, to rush home in the traffic, instead of just being more present in the moment.
Definitely.
It's just the nature of way, I guess, again,
Yeah.
conditioning, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's just new habits that we need to learn and adopt.
Yeah, definitely. That's the thing. It doesn't all happen overnight as well. Rome wasn't built in a day, apparently.
No.
But yeah, it's like the little things as well, those little changes you can make. Because of course we're creatures of habit, and changing habits or altering habits that you find are negative or whatever it is take a lot of patience and time. So yeah.
Willie, you're always so open and honest about, who you are. You're always putting yourself out there. So I just want to thank you for everything you did in the doco, and just for being so open and vulnerable with us today, because the best form of learning is lived experience. We love that saying here. So I think it's nice to share a bit about yourself for others, because other people certainly resonate with your story. So thank you so much for always being so open and vulnerable with us.
Raw.
And raw.
Thank you.
Yeah. We love you very much.
Well, I love you too, Vinny and Ty. And I feel very, very connected to your studio and all your projects. And I love what you're doing. And thanks for having me.
No worries. And Let Us
Thank
to
you. It's our
Anxieties. Let Us to Anxieties is on our website now. So
It is, yes.
Yeah, go take a look.
Yeah, and the ebbs and the flows.
And ebbs and flows. Get around it.
Big time. But no, thank you.
Thanks. Love you, mate.
Love you,
too.
mate. Bring it in.
Thanks for listening to In Depth and In Focus. Your support is greatly appreciated. So if you want to hear more from us and our guests, please hit subscribe.